Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to all the ones of you that I already say hello. Welcome to everybody that's coming in right now. Thanks for joining us today to this webinar live from Rotterdam. So good morning if you are anywhere in the Americas. Good afternoon if, like me, you are in Europe. And also, like our speakers, my name is Marcel Langone. I'm project manager at Solarplaza. I will be joined today by Vishal Punamiya, his CEO at Sitemark, and also by Stein Scherling, his Solar Lab manager at Angela Bruna. And today we will be talking about practical and proven ways to leverage aerial inspection for increased solar asset ROI. So without further ado, I would like to give you a little bit of an impression of the agenda. So first of all, cope with me, a brief introduction. Then we will cover with Vishal and with Stein topics like aerial inspection applications during the whole life cycle of solar assets. What are the solution offerings available to asset managers and owners? So what to take into consideration when you're looking to contract the aerial inspection service, and then we'll jump into some case studies, and afterwards we're going to conduct a Q&A. Important to say that the questions are open at any time, so if you have questions for our speakers, please write us and in the chat box, and then we'll get those questions answered, and then after 1 hour approximately, we will end our webinar. For those of you that aren't so familiar with Solarplaza yet, we are a B2B solar conference organized. We have organized over 125 events all over the world, from Chile to Japan, and well, our aim is to accelerate the sustainable energy transition by connecting professionals from everywhere in the world. This webinar is also a pre-call to our upcoming conference in Mexico City, Solar Asset Management, Mexico and Central America. It will take place on the 8th and 9th of October. It's focused on the operational phase of solar plants and portfolios in the region, and we will be joined by over 200 attendees from the entire value chain, and also more than 40 leading experts will be joining us on stage in 5 weeks, Mexico City. So hope to meet many of you there. I would like to thank our sponsors of the conference that made the conference and also our content possible. Special thanks to Sitemark here that is joining us for today. And also on your screen you have now some of the organizations and companies that will be with us in October. So don't miss a chance to connect with these professionals, with these companies. And also the early bird expires this Friday, 6th of September. So if you haven't yet taken the chance of registering for the conference, you can register until Friday, 6th of September on this special pricing. And also as webinar participant, you can claim your 5% discount as an attendee. And before getting started with the webinar, just a brief recap. If you have technical issues, use the chat box to communicate with us. We'll be happy to help you. If you have any questions, use the question box. You can send your questions during the presentation. We'll make the Q&A after our speakers have presented, and the slides are available in the handouts section. So you can already, from this moment, download the presentations. And finally, the recordings will be available afterwards. So you'll receive those in your inbox soon. And with that, I would like to present our first speaker of today, Vishal Punamiya. He's CEO at Sitemark. He has over 13 years of corporate experience of managing regional and global IT organizations. He's especially passionate about connecting new technologies to mainstream applications in order to address real business needs. And with that, Vishal, the stage is yours. You can also tell us a bit more on your passion on sustainability and go forward with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel. We're quite excited actually to be also attending Mexico this year. So I'm quite keen on meeting some of the companies we met last year and also build on some of the projects that we've been working on in LATAM, thanks to the SAM event last year, but also building on the experience that we have gained through our European partners with whom we've done operations in LATAM and the Americas in general. So the purpose of the presentation today is, the next presenter after my presentation, as you mentioned, Marcel, is going to be Stijn, who is, we have been in touch with and we've been working with now for over 2 years. So my presentation is going to be a segue into his presentation, where he will be presenting more details on what we've been doing, but also their experience so far in the solar business. And they've pretty much been the spearheads within the PV business for almost, I think, 20 plus years. I think Stijn will probably cover that. So the purpose of my presentation today, I'm just trying to, okay, now I can click and go forward, so that's good. So the purpose of my presentation today, now those of you that might have attended the last year Mexico event and the webinar, we had really focused in on the construction side of the story of how aerial data is being used within the construction business. I think we've done a few webinars on construction side, but today's webinar is going to be purely focused on things like COD, EPC to O&M handover, or let's say the warranty claim period, inspections, and also at the end some of the case studies. Just one case study that we picked on things like hail damage, which is something we've seen quite a bit of in the Americas. Not, of course, everywhere, like like in the Atacama or something, but primarily in let's say the southern hemisphere of the United States, the southern side of the United States. So basically, today's focus is going to be purely inspection side of the story, but I will just spend with this one particular slide to talk a little bit about the company for those of you that might not be familiar with SiteMark. So we've recently just rebranded the logo and everything, so you might have seen a circle, but we're still the same company. We're just going into what we call as the SiteMark 3.0 vision, which I will talk about in a brief snippet later on and during the slide presentation. So a little bit of the company. We are in about 6 continents today, 30 plus countries. I think we just added 2 new countries last month in August. So that was South Korea and Israel. So it's now about 33, 34 countries. This year alone, I think we've crossed about 2,000 sites, 2,300 sites or so, active sites where we're doing inspections from everything from, so as a company, we're active in construction, energy, agriculture, and mining. So what you see here is purely solar. So that's about 2,500 inspections since last year, 2018 beginning. We've covered about 4 gigawatts of IR inspections. And of course, in terms of construction and so on, monitoring, I mean, we typically measure that in hectares and not in gigawatts. So that's why it's, we are only talking about IR inspections for this year. So we have about 80 plus customers within solar today in about 32 countries. I'm just trying to see how to get to the next slide. Okay, right. Okay, Marcel, you were right. If I click too fast, it goes to the next slide. So within the construction phase, when we started as a company, we pretty much started in the commissioning and the operational phase. But for about 2 years now, we've added everything from pre-construction to construction to commissioning, and we've also been involved in a few M&As or divesting of assets where our customers are trying to divest out of certain assets because their contracts have expired, or they're selling off assets because purely their focus was to keep them for 5 years and then divest out and sell them to somebody else. So we've done quite a few of those now. So we've literally started to cover the entire life cycle of the construction, all the way to even from topology and topography, all the way to M&As and decommissioning as well. So if we go to particularly LATAM now, since we are talking about let's say the LATAM region, starting with Mexico. We thought it would be worthwhile talking about one of our customers. So they are one of our. We've done projects not just in LATAM for them, but also in other parts of the world for Neoen. So some of you might know them. They're a French player, but active globally as well. So I might be wrong, but I know that the time when we inspected this site for them this year, not so far, I think a couple of months ago. This was, at least from my understanding, the largest site in El Salvador. I know that there are a few new sites that are still being built, which are bigger, but this was about 101 megawatt peak, spread across 108 hectares. So the ground coverage is quite dense. And basically, this particular site was inspected in solely for the purpose because it was the end of the EPC warranty of 2 years of operation, and they wanted to do a kind of a check to make sure that anything that would be out of within the warranty coverage could be replaced at free of cost to the asset owner. That's Neoen. And also identifying any other potential issues that need to be resolved before the O&M takeover. So if you see here, I mean, these are just some snippets of our online dashboard. So in this particular issue, so the system actually does everything from loss estimation in terms of dollar value or local currency based on the feed-in tariffs. So you are able to do everything from a loss estimation to understanding of what kind of spreads you have on your on the site in terms of number of types of issues, but also being able to estimate, what are the issues which are causing the maximum losses on your site. So in this particular case, you see that there are a few different types of issues. So we've just picked a few. So the entire site actually has been split into 2 zones. So if I go to the previous slide, you see that indeed there are 2 zones, and that's this is I don't know which one is Zone A and Zone B, but there are 2 zones, as you can see. So clearly Zone B is the big one here. So you can see that there are issues, more number of issues on Zone B than Zone A. So I'm just trying to look at it here. So if you look here, what the system does is basically classifies it everything on an inverter level, or a string level, or a combiner level, depending on how you have classified your site. And more importantly, you can actually see how the losses are occurring based on the types of defects on your site. The system is using a neural network engine to combine with deep learning to understand, the loss estimation. So we've been working quite a lot and investing quite a lot in making these kind of calculations. But what is important here is the system identified basically 449 modules affected by PID, 279 hotspots. Now, of course, there are different root causes behind what may cause a hotspot, but basically the system has categorizes different types of issues. So we've just selected a few here for this particular case study. So what you see here is this is something we see quite often where there are typically rocks or that might have fallen on the modules, probably carried by birds. We see that quite a bit in Asia as well, like Japan and so on. But in this particular case, there are clearly visual marks of stones have been dropped on the which is a visual thing. But in this particular case, you also see clearly that they're being marked by thermal hotspots. on the site. So here on top you have cracked modules, what the cracked modules look like by stones that have fallen through birds, and here of course a bypass substring, which is an example here. Now this one is not a very good image of what PID issues look like. Let me what I will do is we will probably show better. Oh, there we go. There's an example. So here you don't see because it's not completely zoomed in because PIDs are quite hard to identify simply because of the temperature variables. But what is important here is indeed zooming into what PID issues look like. So I think if you have questions on some more examples, just let us know in the poll questions, and we can definitely share some more examples there. But here you typically see how the system identifies PID issues. So in conclusions for La Providencia Solar, you see that of course it's a pretty new site. So less than 1% of the modules had anomalies on it, or some kind of defect on it, which would either be which can either be resolved by replacing a module or fixing issues like PID, which with PID boxes of some sort. Or just perhaps even module cleaning or junction box failures or things like that. So here in this particular case, it was a very interesting ROI for us because we had luckily the customer being able to replace 100 modules under the EPC warranty because these were hotspots caused by some kind of a defect on the module. Or related issues. So that's about was something that the customer didn't have to pay for. One. The second is that we also calculated. Now, of course, this is based on the feed-in tariffs for this particular site. That they were able to increase production by about $7,000 in terms of the losses that were resulting from the defects. And also the fact that the suspected PID issues were being closely monitored because there were some sites some sections on the site that had progressive PID. Some of them had more advanced PID issues, which had to be addressed with PID boxes or other types of mitigation actions. But what is important is that we were able to prove to the customer, thanks to these calculations, and the validation on the numbers with the team on site, that basically the ROI of the whole inspection was pretty much paid out within 1 year. And this is something that I've seen more and more on sites that we have that are being inspected using an aerial data analytics platform such as SiteMark today. So the higher the feed-in tariffs, especially in countries, for example, like Japan, what we've seen, some early sites in Mexico, or even new markets like South Korea and so on, we see ROIs. It's not common. It's not very unusual to see ROIs of $100,000+ on pretty small sites, as small as literally 15 megawatts. Okay. So there is the next use case here. So this is another site in the southern region of the U.S. So basically Texas, Arizona region, where basically you see that the site visually looks okay. And in fact, in this particular case, we did an inspection earlier this year for the customer where they had a loss in. They were seeing loss in production. But visually, there was nothing wrong, especially with the site engineers when they visited the site. But after the inspection, we noticed that there were significant issues on the entire site. So what you see in green here, the green dots are particularly actually hail damage. So visually, the modules weren't cracked or anything like that. But doing a thermal inspection, you were able to identify that there was massive amount of hail damage within on the module. So what we've done here is selected a section of the site with some modules on it where you do see the hail damage. And what is interesting is that to a normal or common, let's say, person, you could easily confuse it with PID. And this is actually what happened with us. where we literally for the algorithms identified it as PID, but on close inspection and on a large section of the site, it was very easy to spot that this was indeed hail damage and not PID. So this is where we made, our system actually even made some wrong analysis, which is one of the reasons why we picked this particular site, to show that a PID issue can have a very similar, similar signatures to hail damage if the hail damage has some specific if the hailstones had a specific characteristic in terms of size and density. So so in this particular case, what was interesting was that, and I will this was the first case for us. We did one last year, so this was the second time where we were able to actually help using this data to do a high-level inspection first. So they were really able to identify the scale of the problem, one. Second is, based on the scale of the problem, they were able to statistic sampling on how bad some of the modules were damaged, particularly by doing flash testing as well. So they did flash testing on select modules. And then based on those combined results, they were able to get an insurance claim for the site. Unfortunately, I can't share further details on this, but I will, as I said earlier, I wanted to do a segue into Stain's presentation because they are much more focused on helping customers with, taking to that next level of what happens downstream from here. In the Mexico presentation last year, I had also talked about, from a thought leadership perspective, of what's happening in the aerial data sector using UAVs. So one of the things that we see a huge trend in is combining inverter monitoring with or SCADA monitoring with visual data. So that's something that is very common now in the industry. So please do reach out to us if you have questions on how inverter monitoring can be done using, as examples, inverter monitoring, combining that with, let's say, aerial data analytics platform. That's one. Combining SCADA platforms, number two. But also on a construction monitoring of site, what are some of the use cases on how customers like NG, for instance, are using aerial data to monitor, control, and do better evaluations during COD of new sites. So thank you. With that, I will open up. I think there were some poll questions, if I'm not mistaken, Marcel, but I'll leave the logistics on that with you.
Thanks, Vishal. Maybe thanks for showing such comprehensive results on the cases. Since we have quite some time to still in the webinar, maybe let's just launch the first poll questions. Let's see where our participants are from. In this case, it's also very interesting to see with use cases from the US, from Latin America, and then later with Stain, we'll see some from Europe. It will be interesting to see where our audience is joining us from. We'll show the results in a couple of seconds. Okay, quite a mixed crowd, I would say.
Yes.
Mexico and Latin take the majority, but indeed quite a mixed crowd here.
Yeah, thanks for that, Marcel, because this was something that was quite important for me to understand as well, and that was one of the reasons why I chose, some LATAM sites, one LATAM site and one US site, because I wasn't quite sure, given the time, the timing of the day. My expectation was indeed to have US and LATAM coming in first, but good to see that Europe is there as well, because Stain's presentation will focus on Europe. Although, in fact, we've been working with them in Chile and other places as well.
Thanks very much, Vishal. We'll get back to you for the Q&A. In the meantime, I encourage everybody to still put up their questions so we can answer all of them after Stain presentation. And without further ado, I would like to introduce him to the webinar to all of you. Next, we have Stain Sherlink, and I'm sorry, Stain, if I'm pronouncing wrongly your surname. You'll be able to correct me in a few seconds. Stain has over 9 years of experience at Angela Bruna in particular. He's responsible for an international team of solar experts, and he and his team offer research, development, and operational excellence service in both DG assets, but also large-scale solar assets. So, Stein, welcome to our webinar. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marcel, for the introduction. So indeed, my name is Stijn Scheerlink. Don't worry about the pronunciation. Manager of the Solar Lab at Angela Bruna, and I have the pleasure to share with you a case study we have done last year in collaboration with Sitemark. Yeah. So first of all, who is Angela Bruna? So Angela Bruna is a company of around 250 people. We are headquartered near Brussels in Belgium, and we have branch offices in Latin America, Europe, Middle East, and Asia. And our specialization is electrical power technology. So we provide expertise, operational excellence services, and solutions over the full electricity value chain, including electricity generation, but also electricity transmission and distribution, electrical storage as well, something which becomes more and more important, down to end use of electricity for example, street lighting or smart appliances. We are there since more than 50 years, first as a very local center of research, and then slowly growing to a large expertise center with activities in various parts of the world. So we belong to ENGIE, indeed, which is a global energy and services group who is very ambitious in deploying decarbonization solutions, among others through the build-out of renewable generation capacity. And in fact, last year, ENGIE has put itself as a target to add 9 gigawatts of renewable capacity to its portfolio by 2021, so in 2 years. And specifically, if you look to solar, ENGIE is active in the construction and operation and maintenance of solar assets for a total currently of about 3 gigawatts worldwide. So back to Angela Bruna. So who are we working for? So clients of Angela Bruna are mainly asset managers and fleet managers to whom we add value through our services. So we help them to get the best out of their assets by identifying quick wins, providing solutions for performance improvement, etc. Also, in case of problems, which in some cases can be quite severe, we are there to help out by identifying the root causes and providing a solution independent of equipment suppliers. And the main reason why we are trusted by our clients is because our scope is really not limited to one or the other component. We are trusted because we understand the complexity behind the interaction between all of these components in an integrated asset. For example, the topic of today, a photovoltaic power plant. There are photovoltaic panels, there are inverters, there are cables, there is the SCADA system, there is the controller, the trackers, etc. They are all different components, but they have their own characteristics, their own behavior, which depends a lot on the operating conditions, and they work as an integral asset. They all interact somehow, which makes it very difficult, especially in case of serious underperformance, to know where to start solving it. And as we are the most active in the operation and maintenance of assets, let me go a little bit deeper to the case of solar photovoltaic assets. As an asset manager or an operator, you may be confronted with an issue of underperformance on your photovoltaic installation, something you suspect from, for example, from your monitoring. What lays behind may be a problem with your modules, such as some kind of degradation. This can be light-induced degradation, nowadays light and elevated temperature-induced degradation, potential-induced degradation, whatever. Some are perfectly normal, others can seriously impact the performance of the whole asset when not rectified immediately. Or you may be confronted to environmental conditions that you did not really expect. A good example is soiling, which is essentially dirt that stays on the panels in a homogeneous way or inhomogeneously distributed over the plant. Or you may have expected high soiling rates and therefore have regular cleaning actions in place, but you do not really see the effect of it. Or you may be confronted with an inverter problem. You may use either string inverters or centralized inverters, or more in general, you may have a problem in your electrical system, like ground faults, causing shutdowns, regular shutdowns of several of your inverters. Or you may actually be confronted with a problem in your monitoring system itself, with data that is suddenly lost or of low quality or giving inconsistent information. Or you may have a mechanical problem with the trackers, for example, or maybe there is nothing wrong with your modules, inverters, or electrical system, but only with the fixations and calibrations of your monitoring instruments. This is, of course, these are various problems that, although all of these possible root causes may seem independent, they are not. And actually, often they are very closely related. And then, of course, the difficulty for the asset manager or fleet operator is what to tackle first. What should get the higher priority? So, in order to do this, you need a multidisciplinary approach that needed to solve issues of underperformance. I hope, in the meantime, my slides are well following my speech. I hope so. So this slide basically shows the toolbox which we have been using in the past to diagnose, localize, and prioritize actions of preventive or corrective maintenance or solution implementation. The first straightforward action, which you all know very well, is visual inspections, which they remain a very effective way of identifying problems and have a general, let's say, impression on the state of health of an asset. But of course, it has its limitations, basically because many of the items I mentioned before in the previous slide, you cannot visually see. So another technique is monitoring and data analysis. Well, there is a huge amount of information you can deduce from monitoring data. That is without any doubt. We also, so we use very powerful data analytics tools to do all this kind of analysis, trending, alarm treatment, etc., to help to find root causes. But it has its limitations. Data quality is of very high importance, and in some cases, the data quality is simply not sufficient enough to do analysis. In many cases also, the instrumentation to do the monitoring does not have the granularity you need to actually localize and isolate the problem. So sometimes monitoring is even not well configured, and in those cases, data analysis will puzzle you even more than they provide insight. So also this has its limitations. A third one, which we actually use the most, are measurements, on-site measurements, like IV curve tracing, which is a very accurate tool. It is not just qualitative, it allows you really to accurately quantify and diagnose underperformance on-site. But although it is very accurate, it also has its limitations. You can never do this on entire plants. You can only do samples. So you actually need to know where exactly in your plant you need to measure to help you get the insight you want. So overall, this is a very nice toolbox, but we were clearly missing a brick. And this is when we got to know SiteMark and its drone inspection solutions. So when we met Vishal and his team at SiteMark, we explained that we did all of this kind of work, but that we needed a solution which is capable to screen an entire site in one go, according to high quality standards in the data acquisition and processing, to do this in an automated way, to provide us not just with an overview of the anomalies and their location, but also with the first diagnosis, so that we could prioritize any action that we would be required to do after, which can be measurements on site, etc. And Sitemark said, no problem, which was a surprising answer for us, because we already had contacts with drone inspection companies, solution providers, but none of them could really provide this degree of quality and automation that we asked for. And so, as it was new to us, we tested it in Europe on a number of PV farms. And this is the next slide. So we started a test case. We chose a number of PV plants, smaller scale and larger scale. So smaller scale of about, let's say, a bit less than 1 megawatt to more than 5 megawatt in different countries in Europe. So in different operating conditions, different age, etc. And we ordered the different drone inspections via the Sitemark platform. Although different countries, for us this went very smoothly. We know that there are different permitting regimes, but we did not have anything to do with that. This was really all residing on the side of Sitemark, and we received shortly after the results of those drone inspections. That is to say, so the statistics of the anomalies, the diagnosis, the first diagnosis, the location, etc. And then we treated ourselves these results further in order to get a first quantification of the yield losses that are associated to these anomalies, in order for us to prioritize our actions. Obviously, a precise quantification is not possible. In fact, for this, you need to go on site. You need, you need to measure on site in order to get a precise quantification. But with the right hypothesis, and when you include some of the design parameters of the plants, you can actually quantify the range of the performance loss between a minimum and maximum, which is what we did. And the result you can see in this graph. So showing on the y-axis the yield loss, which of course immediately relates to revenue loss, and on the x-axis the various plants inspected. So the yield loss is between a minimum and a maximum value, and then you see it is broken down according to the impact of the individual anomalies that also were presented by Vishal before. Now, there is a lot to learn, or a lot that we can learn from this analysis, and I cannot go into all of the inspections and the lessons learned we got from it. But just to give you a few examples, though, so clearly, when you look to this graph, the PV plants 3, 2, 6 require more attention than the PV plants numbers 1 and 2. So without the need of having to go on site, on a fleet level, we were able to prioritize which of the plants need our attention first. So this already is very interesting. Then a second example, so if you look, for example, to PV plant number 4, this one suffers from a quite high rate of unknown defects. At that time, this was one of the options well, one of the first diagnosis results labels that were put by the Sitemark solution. So in this case, as we suspected that this could have a big impact, we decided to go on site and to perform IV curve measurements, and actually confirmed that although it was not so clear from the first diagnosis, we had the locations of these suspected unknown failures. We could do local and directed measurements, and in this case, for example, could confirm that it was a potential induced degradation issue, but at an early enough stage to do regeneration. And then another example is, for example, the number 5, where you see that almost 1% is actually lost due to disconnected strings, which is something the operator of the site had not noticed with regular monitoring, and which could immediately be rectified. Which of course gives an immediate impact in the revenues. So for us, this was a very successful test case. I would like to list some of the takeaways we learned. So first of all, the solution that Sitemark offers with the IR drone inspection for us offer a really straightforward approach for screening, detection, but overall localization and first diagnosis of a plant or a fleet of plants. The key advantage is the ease of use. We were really very happy with the smooth way the inspections could be organized and could be planned. No on-site presence was needed from our team. And the comparability between sites is a real advantage of the solution. And for us, as a solution provider for performance improvement, we are now in a position that we can use drone inspections as a first step to screen assets or different assets, and then only go further in locally doing the measurements and quantifying to implement solutions when it is really needed. So this for us was the use case I wanted to present to you. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stijn. Thanks for detailing the results of your case studies and also how to use aerial inspections across the portfolio, your portfolio, and now we still have around 10 minutes, so I would like to start with a few questions from the audience, and of course would like to still remind everybody that you can still put up your questions for us. So yeah, please go ahead if you have questions. Vishal, so just to go back to the case of La Providencia, is this a representative case or of an average ROI, or do you see well, we did discuss a couple of cases also in the US, in Europe. Do you think this is an average ROI, or we're looking at different particular conditions in this case in El Salvador?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, Marcel. So I think the first thing is that the ROI depends on quite a few factors. Of course, the age of the site is an important factor. The second big factor that we've also seen are the feed-in tariffs. So, for instance, even in Japan or Belgium, for that matter, for instance, the feed-in tariffs at some point were pretty high. When the peak or just before the peak of the installation and so on and so forth. So for example, if you look at Belgium, which is a very familiar market to us, being a Belgian company, there was a moment where, like Belgium, for instance, has the highest, right next to Germany, per capita installed capacity of solar energy in the world. Now that's hard to imagine because Belgium is such a small country, but they also have over 3.5 gigawatts of solar installed capacity for such a small country. So, what we typically see is that the ROIs very much depend on the year it was built, the feed-in tariffs, and of course, the size of the site as well. So, for instance, in the case of El Salvador, I mean, you have to keep in mind it's a very new site; it's less than 2 years old. So the expected number of defects that you would expect on a site like that should be pretty minimal. But for instance, it's also very much dependent on who built the site as well. For instance, if you were to do inspection in India, we typically, or other very fast developing markets, we typically see, for instance, a lot of issues where unconnected strings, where there were several strings on a site, like up to almost 20%. that were never connected. And I suppose it's just a rush in how quickly they want to build up and move on to the next site. We also see things like, for instance, module defects right from the very beginning, where brand new modules had like bypass substrings or something like that. So those are the kind of, so it's very hard to say, what the ROI is going to be, but the two major factors, to your point, the three major factors are, of course, the size of the site, the feed-in tariffs, and the age of the site, which we typically see as the three big drivers on.
Indeed. So there's, let's say, indeed these considerations to take into account. And Stein, there's a question for you, and this is quite a common question actually. In terms of when we're looking at the operational maintenance and at the whole operational part of cycle of a solar plant, how often do you need drones inspections?
Well, I think that this really depends on the type of sites. This is also what we see. There should be a first screening that determines, let's say, the state of health of the asset, and from that, actually, you can in some way determine the inspection frequency you need. But once every year, once every 2 years is a typical inspection frequency that you could envisage.
Thank you, Stein. There's a question also related to one of the cases you presented, Vishal. In this case was the US one. When you mentioned that the PID was that the hail damage was actually being seen as similar to a PID issue, what would be or how could you complement aerial inspections with other types of solutions? How do you look at this?
Yeah, so a little bit of background on why the system had determined it as PID versus hail damage. So something that we are always surprised about is in some of the fast growth markets, is or even actually older sites that a lot of them don't have string maps, or the string maps are completely not aligned with what the reality is on site. So what we've seen actually over the last 2 years is we've actually helped the customers even rectify or their string maps based on the as-is layout versus the as-built layout towards the how it was thought to be built and connected. So for instance, for us, the challenge with why the system detected it as PID versus for the first time last year when we saw it, is that our system had never seen what hail damage looked like, because it's always comparing visual images, RGB images to thermal images. And using these interactions, it's able to validate, does the thermal anomaly match the visual anomaly, and so on, and backwards. So in this case, visually everything is fine, but thermally there was something clearly wrong. So the system was kind of confused between, is it an unknown, is it a PID? And because we didn't have the string layouts for that particular site, the system wasn't quite sure, how the strings were connected. And of course, for those of you that may be familiar with PID, it always happens on one end. It starts with one end of the pole of the string, and then kind of extends across the string into multiple strings and so on and so forth. So, in this particular case, that's how we were able to, when we, last year when we didn't have the string maps, that's where the system got confused. Whereas now, for this particular site, we had the string maps, and that's how the system was able to say, okay, no, this is hail damage, although it looks kind of, to a certain extent, like a PID or progressive PID, and we were able to identify that.
Very well. Thanks for clarifying that, Vishal. So another question. This related to soiling. Can drone inspections be used in case of heavy soiling? And now that you mentioned Japan as well recently, a couple of minutes ago, I wonder, when we're talking about heavy soiling, well, we're talking about snow. Can drone inspections be used in these cases?
I'm sorry, Marcel, there was a bad connection. Could you repeat your question?
Yes, of course. This can be either directed to you, Vishal, or to Stein. So my question was in regards to heavy soiling or to snow. Can drone inspections still be used?
Yeah. So for soiling, I'm going to I'll answer it from my way first, from our experience, and then I'll let Stein. I think because Stein has, if I'm not mistaken, a PhD in TV and stuff, so and plus a lot more experience than us in this regard. So with regards to soiling, clearly we do some soiling, whether it's heavy soiling or light soiling and things like that. Clearly, we've seen different types of soiling, everything from desert sand, which requires cleaning, to everything from heavy bird dropping to even like caking happening on rooftop solar, where, for example, exhaust fans have been directed on the modules simply because of bad engineering. So, so those are different kinds of soiling that can be detected. With regards to snow, this is an issue that we do see in Japan. We have seen because we were there last year, and we've been through the whole year now in terms of the whole season. But of course, areas like Minnesota as well in the US is something which gets a lot of snow, but also has a very high concentration of solar. So for instance, if you look at Japan, where typically where you have snowplows going in, we don't see soiling as such a big issue, but we do see module damage, where the snowplows have tried to clean up the modules, and while turning in very close spaces, especially because Japan land is at a premium, we typically see a massive amount of damage caused over time, over one season, where the snowplows were going through between modules and also cleaning up the snow. Especially, we see that on thin film modules quite a bit.
Stein, would you like to complement?
Yes, so I indeed I fully agree. There is different types of soiling, and the different types of soiling come with the different environmental parameters depending on the region where you are. So it is very difficult to deal with it in a generic way. So it is very region dependent, actually, on how to deal with soiling as part of your operation and maintenance strategy. In any case, what I can say is that indeed, as Vishal already mentioned, we have already also worked with Sitemark in Chile, which is a region where some of the farms are indeed in areas with important soiling rates. And for the drone inspections we did over there, we this were inspections on plants that had soiling, and the analysis was possible with the solution of Sitemark. So it shows that to some extent it is when the soiling is of course not completely covering the PV plant, but in that case you have a problem of performance. Drone inspections remain interesting, but I would really recommend to look at from a perspective of the operation and maintenance strategy, and plan the cleaning actions as well as the drone inspection actions in such a way that that they perfectly fit.
Very well. We're almost thanks, Stein. We're almost running out of time, but I would like to still here address the last question. This one for Vishal. Looking forward, looking towards the future in Latin America. So, do you believe that? So, what will be the future in Latin America for the solution? How do you believe aerial inspections will have increased adoption in the region?
Yeah, thanks for that. So typically, we've been in LATAM now for about 2 years. But what is interesting to us as well is that we've also seen, over the last 2 years, increased competition, and I think that's a good thing. Primarily for a few reasons. The first being the fact that if there is competition, that means there is demand. So one of the things we are constantly focused on is working with customers and explaining to them the difference between different value propositions that are coming from the market. So basically comparing, let's say, the one platform to another, one type of inspection to another, because even NG as a company, they have tested different solutions out available in the market. And something that we do focus on with customers in general is to make them aware of the delta or the differences between the different types of solutions, and the different pricing that it comes at it as well, because there are several options available out there towards drone pilots, where they do it themselves and they offer a localized solution to the local utility company, and we have seen NG working also with local pilots, because of the way things are done in different countries, and given how big NG is as a company. So we do see that, and I think one of the key things that we constantly try to focus on through webinars, through materials, through blog posts, is to encourage understanding the differences. That's one. The second thing as well is that different types of utility companies, scale companies, depending on the size and of their portfolio and the maturity of their business and the markets that they work in, they also need different types of solutions. So, I don't think the SiteMark solution as such or any of the competitive solutions are all-encompassing. Typically our customers tend to be the large-scale enterprise companies that operate over multiple geographies, or even have a large amount of portfolio or footprint, whether it's roof types, CNI, or ground-based large-scale sites. But the key thing is that they're looking at the forward, which is where is the industry going into? Do they want a solution that they can fly themselves? Do they want a solution which is a hybrid solution where some sites they want to fly themselves, they want to have that flexibility? The second location could be where they want an all-in solution where everything is done by a service provider. Also the integration with SCADA systems, monitoring systems, asset management systems, portfolio level analytics. So those are the kind of things that we believe should be driving the certain decision-making process in choosing the right solution for the customer, or by the customer as well. So those are the things we see in LATAM. I think LATAM is a very new market in the sense that it's growing at a massive scale. We just deployed Argentina literally a couple of weeks on our first project. So it's something that we see a lot of activity in, a lot of areas of opportunity, but also a lot of areas of improvement. So it's a very interesting market for us, and that's one of the reasons why why we are spending this time and effort in helping, let's say, drive the market from a thought leadership perspective.
Indeed, Vishal. Certainly, we can agree that in the last year it has been quite an increased demand on this type of solutions. Also, as the markets are booming in Latin America, and we're seeing this massive scale plan. So thanks again for this enlightening comments about the future in the industry, especially here in the region in Latin America. So we're rounding off our webinar now, and during the conference 8 and 9 October, we will be still developing further on this webinar topic. Vishal will be presenting at one of our deep dives, so also a very good opportunity to hear more about the topic, to share experiences, to connect. So thanks again, Vishal, Stein. Thanks to all of you for participating in this webinar, for being here with us in this productive hour. On the screen, you can see also where we will be next. So in only 5 weeks, we will be in Mexico City for our solar asset management conference. Also in Latin America, we will be 1 month after in Bogota, in Colombia, and still in the solar asset management topic, we will be in Europe by the end of October and in the MENA region by mid-November. So look forward to saying hello to you, at one of these conferences, and would like to still remind you today that for those of you that haven't yet registered, you can still enjoy the early bird rate until Friday, 6 September, and with your participation, you can claim a 5% discount code that is now shown on screen. So thanks for being with us. Wish you a good a good rest of the day for all of you in the Americas, and good evening for all the people that were hearing us from Europe. Quite impressed by the amount of you that were with us today from Europe. Thanks to all of you, and hope to see you in person soon.
Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you, Stein.